I'd like to call this budget hearing of the DC Everest Area School Board to order. First up is Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next up is the purpose of the budget hearing. Katie?
Notice is hereby given to the qualified electors for the DC Everest Area School District comprised of the villages of Hatley, Rothschild, and Weston, the city of Schofield, and towns of Easton, Ringgold, and Weston, Marathon County, and such parts of the city of Wausau, village of Croninwater, and the towns of Norrie, Reed, and Wausau, Marathon County, as are in said district, that the budget hearing for the 2025-2026 school year will be held in the DC Everest Administration Building at 6100 Alderson Street in Weston, 54476 on the 22nd day of October 2025 at 6 p.m. Detailed copies of the budget are available at the district business office at 6100 Alderson Street, Weston, Wisconsin, 54476, and on our website, address as listed in the paperwork. Immediately following the budget hearing, the annual meeting will be held in the same location. School board members will attend this meeting as private citizens. No official school board action will be taken. Dated this 10th day of October, 2025.
Thank you. And with that, I would like to welcome everyone to this budget hearing of the DC Everest School District. The district is fortunate to have strong community support from people like you that take an active interest in your school community. Thank you for taking time to attend tonight's meeting. It is important to note that we welcome differences in opinion and recognize we are all here because we have a vested interest in our children and in our schools. During the hearing portion of the meeting, there are no motions acted upon. There is a time set for question and comments. Participants will be recognized by the presiding officer and are asked to clearly state their name and address before beginning their remarks. And with that, we will move into the review of the proposed 25-26 budget.
As Dr. Strike makes her way up there, want to for sure give our entire team credit for the work behind the scenes. I hear Kelly and our finance team talk that, the budget isn't something that lives just with our finance team, but something that every year we revisit priorities and reallocate and make sure that we're aligned with the needs of our kids and our community. So, however, they do the lion's share of collecting and making sure that it does align, and Kelly's going to walk you through that tonight. So I appreciate all her work behind the scenes and as well as her team.
Thank you and welcome everyone to the 25-26 budget presentation. Did it fall asleep? There we go. Got it? Thank you. There we go. Tonight, I'm going to review the K-12 education impacts of the state budget, review revenue limits and equalization aid, as that's the primary source of revenue. Look at the revenue limit spreadsheet, that's where all the magic happens, and review our tax levy and budget, as well as capital projects planned for the year. So in 25-27 state budget, we are in the first year of a state budget. The revenue limit adjustment was $325 per pupil for both fiscal years, and the low revenue ceiling remained at $11,000. There were no changes to current law in equalization aid or how much was distributed into aid, and as I get through the budget later, you'll kind of see the impacts of that, and I'll explain how we adjusted as a result. A big change was an increase to our special education categorical aid. It is some certain amount of 42%. There is a bucket, and often they can't reach that, so it likely will be a little bit less. For example, this past year, it was supposed to be 33%. It ended in the year with 30.64, but we are making a big adjustment that's going to result in almost a $900,000 increase in special education aid. There were some adjustments to high-cost special education aid, but that's a smaller amount for many districts, including ours. And school-based mental health services continued, but you will see a big drop-off after this year into next year in terms of that allocation and the amount given to districts, including ourselves. So just a little bit of a reminder on revenue limits. They were implemented in the 93-94 school year. The revenue limit is the total maximum amount of revenue that can be raised through state aid and property tax. So you'll see the calculation. You can say revenue limit minus general aid ends up being your tax levy or your property tax levy. When you add tax levy and aid, that's your total revenue limit. That is set where a district cannot exceed that without a referendum. It is calculated based on your 3-year rolling membership average, which we'll dig into. It is the primary source of revenue for most school districts, including ours. It was designed with the intent to be adjusted annually for inflationary purposes, although it hasn't been in many years, and as I said, only exceeded through referendum. So it's just another way to look at that that math equation. We're math people, we like math. So aid plus tax levy, that is your total revenue limit. The fundamental purpose behind equalization aid is to level the playing field by providing assistance, distributing aid to poorer districts, and that's measured by property value. So in fact, there are some districts that receive no aid or very little aid. But again, the combination of tax levy and general aid is still set by that revenue limit, which is set for each district. So this is the revenue limit spreadsheet, and if you looked at the annual meeting booklet or any of those materials, I know it's really small, but I just like to highlight this is where I said this is where the magic happens. This is where all the calculations are run. So if you look at key arrows on the left side, the first arrow I'm pointing to the membership 3-year rolling average. We'll look at that a little bit more closely. That bottom amount, although it's a big dollar amount, that's that property value. So that's going to help calculate how much aid a district receives. In the top arrow, if we're moving to the right side, go to the top. When I mentioned that $11,325, that's what's set in the budget each year. That helps determine the calculations. The next smaller arrow I'm just pointing out is the declining enrollment exemption. This is a large number, and something that DC Everest is experiencing is declining enrollment. The important idea behind that, more than the amount, is that recognize as districts have big shifts, and it could be a growth or a decline in enrollment, there is an adjustment within that exemption so you don't feel that drop off so drastically. At the same time, if you're growing, you may not see that increase as drastically as well. The fact that we're so that we have a more significant decline in enrollment than we've seen, just realize that's revenue that we're getting this year that didn't drop off as a result of that drop, but we need to look and forecast ahead and plan for that. That third, I should say, small arrow is that total, and we'll look at that number a little more closely. That's that total revenue limit I talked about. And then ultimately on the bottom, it breaks down the tax levy and the mill rate, which we'll look at a little bit more closely as well. So first I mentioned membership. So membership measures the portion of full-time enrollment think of DC Everest students. This is, if you hear about the third Friday count, these are third Friday counts. It's not adjusted later in the year from a revenue limit membership perspective. It does whatever it is in September, that's where it stays. You can look over the course of the last 3 years. Something else I'd like to point out as we look at that third Friday count, this is also how summer FTE counts. Summer school FTE is calculated into this. It's not its own revenue stream or a separate pot. It's just part of that revenue limit. So you can see that we continue to decline with our 3-year average is now at 5,682. And because we're significantly in declining enrollment, and going back to that number I showed before, even a shift of, there's a pretty broad range. If we had counted 50 more students, we wouldn't have seen $1 more, because you kind of have to pay back. They often talk about pay back that declining enrollment exemption. It would just lower that amount before we got additional revenue. So this decline that we're in, or that declining enrollment exemption, is something that we need to continue to look at and plan for. In another way, this is headcount, and I like to talk about headcount. That sometimes this represents the students in seats, the number of students that we are educating. And that doesn't always match membership, primarily because of open enrollment. There can be some other factors. So I think these are two important graphs to take a look at in terms of, you can see the trends with open enrollment. The top green bar is the amount of students coming into DC Everest from other districts. And you can see that's been fairly level the last 3 years, but is a little bit of a decline. But you can also see on the bottom, the red line, that's open enrollment out. And so you can see that has definitely been ticking up the last 3 years. So although more students are coming in than out, those are important things to consider as it relates to the number of students we educate and our revenue position. So if you look, you can see that we were very steady for many years. Head count again, and I'm looking at the chart on the left. That is the number of students we are educating. We have dropped over 208 students in the last 2 years. So that's a significant decline in the number of students we're educating. Some year-over-year changes. So a lot of these numbers I highlighted in arrows on the revenue limit spreadsheet, but I just want to take a look at the 3-year trends. The top is that 3-year membership average I talked about. And so you can see at 5,682, down significantly from the last 2 years. The total revenue limit, and this is the important one in terms of this is most of our revenue as a district comes from this. You can see those increases, and those are typically done, like I mentioned, the $325 per pupil amount. Low revenue ceiling plays a factor as well, so you can see the increase in total revenue limit. You'll notice when we look at the Fund 10 levy, you can see a big jump up. That's primarily because when we talk about that equation, you can also see with aid that our number is almost the same as last year, slightly higher. That is largely due to the fact that in the state budget, they put no additional dollars into aid. So although the revenue limit increased by $325, that the aid stayed somewhat similar, that shifted to the taxpayer. However, I will later show you that through debt defeasance, we're able to keep the levy steady in terms of dollar amounts for our taxpayers, but I do want to show that shift in terms of that budget impact and what that has on aid and tax levy. Property values have gone up again, and you will see from last year went up quite a bit, especially if you look at the change from 23-24 to 24-25, a little bit more. That will ultimately impact the mill rate and distribution. You can see the mill rate went down. So we have this chart in the annual meeting booklet, if you look in detail as well. So I mentioned that Fund 10 levy and that went up, but I think the most important thing to see on this is if you look at that total levy amount, that total, so the sub on the bottom, you can see is the exact same from last school year. So $25,935,544. So we kept Fund 80 levy, just because that's an easy one. I'll point that one out first. That stayed the same at $450,000. Our debt service, our Fund 38 is the not referendum debt, which is energy efficient. That is a set number that's scheduled for us based on previous debt. That stayed fairly steady. And then you'll also notice that in Fund 39, our referendum debt service, this is referendum debt, that we decreased in order to offset that increase in Fund 10. We are still defeasing, meaning we are going to levy more than our payment is. That helps with interest savings over time. That is how we stabilize the total dollar amount in terms of what we are asking from our tax levy. There is a breakdown you can see as well by municipalities in terms of how that distribution is, and property values within each of those cities, townships, villages impacts as well how much that impacts those particular groups or municipalities. I'm going to dig into the budget a little bit more. First, I just want to give some budget perspectives. Just think a school district budget, it's a plan for spending that supports goals and the mission of the school districts. However, changes can happen. We don't know exactly weather conditions that can certainly impact utility costs. There could be change in personnel as people come and go, replacements, benefit selection, all those things can change. And there certainly can be unexpected maintenance needs, which we all know happened last year, for example, pipes at the junior high. So when you're looking at a total budget of over $100 million, a 1% variance at year end is $1 million. So even if you come within $1 million, you're within 1% of your budget. So even though that dollar amount seems large, just think of that in perspective of total budget amounts. So the other thing I want to point out as I go through this is a balanced budget. When we say we have a balanced budget, that just means revenues equals expenditures. So when we're setting budgets, we are both budgeting revenue and expenditures, and changes in either one could ultimately impact how the year ends. In Wisconsin, with revenue limits, that tax levy and that aid, that's most of our revenue that is set, and it's going to end the year that way. We know that, so that's pretty steady, but there are other variables. The other thing that we'll take a look at through much of this, or if you're looking at your materials, is fund balance. And that is a point in time, so on June 30th of the previous year, that is the difference between assets and liabilities at the end of that fiscal year. It's important to know that that's not a savings account or a separate cash account or bank account. That is how the year ended. And even though, and we'll say, for example, in Fund 10, we'll look at was just over $20 million, that doesn't mean we have $20 million in the bank throughout the year. With school districts, although we are paying bills, paying our staff, there's payroll runs consistently, our revenue comes in somewhat inconsistently, and so that fund balance helps to change that. So we talk about that with cash flow, and our cash flow falls far below that fund balance at different times in the year. Most districts have a gap in funding for capital project needs, and so utilizing Fund 46, which we'll talk about a little bit later, is a way to help assist with capital project needs as well. So I just want to hit on the funds. We often say operational funds are Fund 10 and Fund 27. Fund 10 is our general fund. That's the largest fund where most of the general operations happens. Fund 27, as a reminder, is our special education fund. So the two of those together are our general operations, where other funds have unique and set purposes. And at the end of each year, typically the revenue that we get for special ed versus our costs falls short. So we always do a transfer from 10 to 27 because 27 has to end the year at zero. No fund balance, revenues equaling expenses at year end. Other funds that I'll mention are Fund 21, that's special revenue funds that essentially is our student activity accounts. SBAA, we often refer to them here at DCE, but that are student activity accounts for clubs and organizations. It's also where we keep donations. Fund 38 and 39 is our debt. 46 is that long-term capital improvement trust fund. That is a separate bank account trust fund where you can make transfers or year-end deposits, but you can only spend for capital projects and only if a district has a 10-year plan. Fund 50 is our food service, so it's specifically just to food service. 72 is scholarships. 73 we won't hit on, but just as much tonight, but that's our post-employment benefit fund. And Fund 80 is community service fund. When we look at all of these funds together, where does our money come from? Our revenues come from? That lighter blue, the biggest piece of that pie, as you can see, is almost 60%. That is from the state. The next largest, that little, it's more of a royal blue, I would call it, local. So that is largely that revenue limits. That is going to be your tax levy in your state. There are some state grants, gate receipts and things as well, but that's largely where our revenue is coming from. The next notable one, federal funds account for this year anyways, about 5.4%. That orange is going to be open enrollment. And then there are some other things as well, but just gives a concept of that state and especially the revenue limit and the impacts on our revenue. How do we spend our money? Again, looking at all funds, the largest piece is salaries. Sorry, didn't advance. Sorry. The blue is salaries, that orange is benefits. Most school districts, we would say about 2/3 of your budget is spent on your people. I would often say that's our most valuable resource. Our teachers, our staff that are supporting the learning of our students. The gray, the next largest piece is purchase services. That can be anything from paying our utilities to paying the bus company. We're paying another entity to support us. And then supplies, capital projects, insurance judgments, etc. So that's just how the pie works out in terms of how we're spending our money. I'll dig into operations or Fund 10. We have a long, if you want to see the long detailed, I put a summary in our slides. The fund balance, as I mentioned before, is just over $20.4 million. That was last year and starting the year. We have a balanced budget, so we intend to end the year with that as well. We have a balanced budget of just over $82.2 million, both in revenue and expenses. For special education, our budget this year is just over 15.1 million. We are currently have a budget transfer in the amount of just over 8.2 million. That's the transfer I talked about from 10 to 27. That exact amount will be determined at year end when all costs are done. That will make that transfer. Fund 21, if you look at year over year, oh, sorry, I was a slide behind. Sorry about that. Fund 21 are donations and our student activity accounts. I outlined the budget. You'll probably see that why is the budget so small and it grows throughout the year? This is so much dependent on what clubs and activities, how much they fundraise, how much they spend, each club and each activity. So this is something in our monthly budget transfers. We always keep their budget with what's in their account, and so this continually updates or often increases throughout the year as they fundraise, get funds. It'll end the year quite differently than how it started. So I just want to point that out, but we keep track of that based on how much comes in. Funds 38 and 39 are our debt. As I mentioned, 38 is non-referendum debt for energy efficiency. That is a scheduled amount. In 25-26, our referendum debt levy is just over 8.9 million. Once again, we do plan to defease additional debt, meaning we will defease more and pay more for future interest savings. And this year, I did want to highlight this will be 5 years of defeasance, so this will be year 6. You can see historically those defeasance amounts and how much interest savings that's resulted in. So we have nearly, prior to this year, almost $10 million in interest savings from the defeasance we've done in the last 5 years. Debt defeasance is a good tool to use as we see different shifts on however that state budget or property values play out as the year ends. As I mentioned, we may see fluctuations. So making adjustments to our debt defeasance, defeasing, adjusting those amounts allows us to keep a stable ask of our taxpayers in terms of levy. 46, again, is our capital improvement fund. That is a trust fund. This is a separate bank account at year end, for example. We ended the year, you'll notice, perfectly balanced. That is because we made a transfer on June 30th, just over $2.3 million into our capital improvement fund. Just to give context as well, so our balance after that transfer was just over 4.1 million at year end. When I pulled this on earlier this month, it was just over 2.9 million. Because we do a lot of our projects, our capital projects in the summer, quite a bit of spending happened in July and August. We also have planned about $500,000 of remaining projects this year. In through June, that's our best estimate. We have not budgeted the full amount in there. Jason Jablonski and I have talked about that, and what's nice to have a balance in there is in the event we have an unexpected emergency or capital emergency, we do have funds to go to. The other thing is over time, if we can build up that balance, we might be able to take on a larger project item, a project that has higher costs than we can absorb in our regular budget. So I would imagine that we would end our year with some balance, and we may be able to do a contribution at year end as well. Food Service Fund, you will see this one is, and I mentioned in previous board meetings for those that have been in attendance, we don't have this balance. There's our budget is expenditure slightly over revenue. However, we'll continue to monitor this and make adjustments and hope to end the year balanced without dipping into fund balance. The year ended at $386,000 of fund balance. You will see a big drop in that fund balance. That's largely due to the project that we did at the senior high. It was over 2 fiscal years, but that is where a large amount of that fund balance went from 23-24 until how the year ended last year. And finally, we have our Community Service Fund, Fund 80. For us, we do pay our tax levy is a total of $450,000. Our SROs, we do support part of the funding for our SROs comes from Fund 80, and the other portion goes to GTCC. We haven't changed this levy amount or the amount given to GTCC in several years. If you look at the difference of the budget and shifting to the budget, 23-24 to 24-25, we opened our new building and therefore programming opened. So you'll see a big jump in the budget. You'll notice in 25, 26, there's also a large difference. This is because this year we intend to do the addition. We're going to add cooling to the arena and replacement of the hockey chiller. That is going to be fully funded through donations. That will actually be approved, I think, at the board meeting following this, the annual meeting. So you will see a big increase in both revenue and expenses because we are budgeting both for the donations and costs. We'll likely go back down to a similar to 24, 25, potentially a little bit above or below in the following year, but wanted to point out that difference. Again, balanced. Thank you, and I'm open to any questions if anyone has any questions.
I think you're off the hook.
I can't turn this off.
And with that, we will adjourn that budget hearing. And we will call the 76th Annual School District Meeting of the DC Everest School District to order. Next up is the reading of the office notice of meeting.
Notice is hereby given to the qualified electors for the DC Everest Area School District comprised of the villages of Hatley, Rothschild, and Weston, City of Schofield, and towns of Easton, Ringgold, and Weston, Marathon County, and such parts of the City of Wausau, Village of Cronawater, and the towns of Norrie, Reed, and Wausau, Marathon County, as are in said district, that the budget hearing for the 2025-2026 school year will be held in the DC Everest Administration Building, 6100 Alderson Street, Weston, Wisconsin 54476 on the 22nd day of October 2025 at 6 p.m. Detailed copies of the budget are available at the district business office at 6100 Alderson Street, Weston, Wisconsin 54476, and posted on our district website with the link listed in the materials. Immediately following the budget hearing, the annual meeting will be held in the same location. School board members will attend this meeting as private citizens. No official school board action will be taken. Dated the 17th day of October, 2025.
Thank you. And with that, Robert's Rules of Order will prevail for this meeting. Local attorney Davis Rundy of the Weld Riley Law Firm is present as parliamentarian. During the annual meeting portion of the meeting, there will be motions acted upon. Participants will be recognized by the presiding officer and are asked to please clearly state their name and address before beginning their motion, send, or remarks. Only district residents may participate in this meeting. And with that, I will now accept nominations for the election of the chairperson of this annual meeting.
Michelle Rothmeyer, 2137 Center Drive, Cronawater. I nominate Lindsay Woods.
With that, I have to ask 3 times. Are there any additional nominations? Are there any additional nominations? Are there any additional nominations? Is there a second to the nomination?
I'll second Katie Felch, 226 102 County Road J, Weston, Wisconsin 54476.
All right. Are there any additional nominations? Hearing none, this requires a voice vote. All those in favor state aye. Aye. And with that, I will preside on the meeting. Next up is read and approve the treasurer's report.
220-216, Pine Hills Drive, Boston, Wisconsin 54403. I move to dispense with the reading of the treasurer's report.
Is there a second to the motion?
I would second Jason McFarland, 1837 Deerwood Trail.
This requires a voice vote. All those in favor of approving the treasurer's report, state aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes. Next up is school board salaries. Is there a motion to set the school board salaries for 25-26 at $3,100?
Mike Rathers, Second School of Executive Board, Western Wisconsin 54476. I move to set the school board salary for the 25-26 school year at $3,100.
Is there a second?
6202 Daniel Drive, Western Wisconsin, 54476. I will second that motion.
Is there any discussion on this motion? Hearing none, this requires a voice vote. All those in favor state aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Abstain.
Same. Thank you. Next, is there a motion to provide reimbursement of the school board expenses per bylaw 0144.1?
Sarah Junior, 221918 Road, Wisconsin, 54471. And move to provide for reimbursements for board expenses as per
Is there a second to that motion? Is there any additional discussion on this? Hearing none, this requires a voice vote. All those in favor state aye. Any opposed? That passes. Next, we will set the 25-26 tax levy. Is there a motion to set the 25-26 tax levy at 20? Go ahead.
Bonsky, 9306 Lambert Street, Montreal. I need to set the 2025-2026 tax levy at $25,925,524.
Thank you. Is there a second to that motion?
Second, reading number 06 Stanfield Avenue, Montreal.
Is there any additional discussion on that? Hearing none, this requires a voice vote. All those in favor state aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes. And with that, is there a motion to allow the school board to set the time and place of the 2026 annual district meeting?
I move 1837 Union Trail. I move to allow the school board to set the time and place of the 2026 annual district.
Is there a second?
Second, Aaron Hall, 4102, provide the vote by voice.
Is there any additional discussion on this one? Hearing none, this requires a voice vote. All those in favor state aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion passes. And with that, we will adjourn the meeting.